He hadn't recognised her normally slim outline, wrapped in the voluminous Winnie the Pooh dressing gown and Eeyore slippers.
"Officer, quick! Oh, it's you, Ethan."
Momentarily stunned by the fact Pippa had recognised him, Ethan stared at her blankly for a minute before responding.
"What's the matter?"
It must be something serious for her to be out on the promenade, looking as if she'd just got out of bed. Her dark curls tumbled around her face, and he felt a dart of familiar attraction.
"I was just looking out of my bedroom window."
She waved her arms around, gesturing at the guest house and the beach. She was out of breath, and her voice was high-pitched with emotion.
"My room's up on the 3rd floor, nearly up by the roof, and I'm sure there's someone lying on the sand down by the waterline. It doesn't look as if they're moving, and the tide's on the turn. Quick!"
Ethan rushed over to the sea wall and looked across the expanse of sand. He could see a dark shape way down by the edge of the waves. A seal, perhaps.
"I'll go and take a look, just in case. It's probably a seal."
He smiled across at her, feeling regret that he couldn't prolong their conversation. Sprinting to the steps which led down onto the beach, he began to run on the pristine sand, just as he'd been imagining such a short while before, although the dream had been minus his boots. If he wasn't so concerned with getting to the shape on the sand, he would have laughed to think Pippa had spoken to him again at last, and more than that, she'd recognised him and remembered his name. He'd also got his wish to run the length of the beach. He only hoped he didn't look as stupid as he'd been thinking he would earlier. He didn't dare turn to see if Pippa was watching him, for fear of falling over his feet and looking even more of an idiot. As he got closer, he could clearly see that the shape on the sand was not a seal, but a person, as Pippa had feared. A body. His steps slowed as he approached, and he used his body cam to record everything in front of him. This could be a crime scene after all, although he couldn't see any sign that anyone else had been on the beach. There was just one set of faint footprints apart from his own. Taking care not to disturb too much sand, he got close enough to establish it was a man lying there, wearing a grey padded coat. He looked asleep, facing the sea. But as an advance wave on the edge of the tide was beginning to lap at his face, and he wasn't reacting, Ethan feared the worst. The man's chinos were sodden, and a bright scarf trailed into the water. Ethan tentatively reached over and felt for a pulse. There wasn't one. The skin of the man's neck was icy cold to his touch, and Ethan shuddered. In contrast to the man, his own heart began to race, and his body was suddenly boiling hot in his winter uniform. Ethan stood up and spoke to police control on his radio, remembering to take a deep breath before he spoke.
"Body on Borteen Beach. Can I have backup and an ambulance? Male, 50s by the looks of it. Although his clothes are wet, there's no indication that he's been washed up on the tide. Footprints lead down to where he's lying. No bruising or deterioration to his face. No obvious sign of injury or attack. Need to be quick, the tide's on the turn. I'm going to have to move him, I'm afraid, but I've recorded how he was lying."
When he'd finished the call, his breathing was erratic with the shock of the find. It didn't matter how many dead bodies he saw, and he hadn't seen that many. It hit home that this had been someone's father, brother, son, husband, lover. One thing Ethan was pretty sure of was that this man wasn't a local. He prided himself on knowing most of the residents of Borteen, and he didn't recognise this individual with his tanned skin and thinning jet-black hair. A tourist, perhaps. Ethan looked back up the beach. His own path across the sand was evident by his footprints. There was no sign of Pippa on the promenade. He scanned the guest-house windows, but couldn't see anyone looking out from there. He was both sad and glad at the same time. It was a triumph Pippa had recognised him and known his name, and he had no wish for her to be traumatised by this body, too. Time seemed to stand still as he maintained his lonely vigil. The scene was quiet. The light had changed quite a lot now the sun was rising, and the threatened snow seemed to have completely disappeared. He watched a crab, brought in by the tide, scuttle over the man's leg. A strand of seaweed settled around his feet. He'd have to try to move the man's body because the tide was about to reach him fully. Ethan gritted his teeth, looped his hands under the man's arms and heaved. The body was a stiff, dead weight,